In a house that seemed perfect, an innocent girl was forced to serve as if she were a stranger in her own home. The stepmother, wrapped in elegance and coldness, humiliated her without knowing that behind the door someone was about to discover the truth: her millionaire father. What happened next would change their lives forever. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. And before we continue, let me wish you health and peace. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? In the city of Boston, in a house that gleamed with luxury, there was a girl whose eyes hid a painful silence. Although everyone thought the Mendoza family was perfect, something dark hid behind the marble walls. The air in the modern mansion on the outskirts always smelled of freshly cut flowers and expensive coffee. But beneath that impeccable surface were corners of silence where a little girl searched for a gesture of affection that almost never came. Mr. Alberto Mendoza was an elegant man, accustomed to moving in glass offices and talking about investments with a firm voice. He had worked his entire life to build a fortune, and now, at 40 years old, enjoyed a prestige that few in Boston could equal. He arrived home in dark suits, well-pressed, leather briefcase, and tired gaze. Often, his business trips kept him away longer than he would like. At least that's what he told himself when he saw his daughter smile timidly upon receiving him. Mrs. Estella, his second wife, was the perfect hostess. Tall, blonde with a luminous smile, she greeted everyone with 2 kisses and a soft voice that seemed like music. In the neighborhood's eyes, she was the portrait of elegance and sweetness. She was always impeccable, in dresses that highlighted her figure and perfumes that left a trail in every hallway of the house. But her gestures had a rehearsed precision, as if each smile were part of a theatrical performance. Sophia, on the other hand, was barely 7 years old and already knew the taste of silence. With blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and a simple dress that contrasted with the house's luxury, she moved carefully through the hallways. She didn't want to bother, didn't want to be a burden. When her father was present, she ran to hug him with the energy of someone who keeps affection in a closed box. And he lifted her in his arms, kissed her forehead, and told her she was growing too fast. But as soon as he stopped, Estella positioned herself between them with the grace of someone organizing the evening, diverting attention toward herself. That afternoon, Alberto had returned for only a few days before leaving again. Estella received him at the entrance with a long kiss on the cheek and an exaggerated smile. Sophia came running from the hallway, her little shoes resonating against the marble floor. She threw herself into her father's arms, who laughed seeing her so excited. Dad, have you really come back?" she whispered, clinging to his neck. "Of course, my princess," he responded, pressing her against his chest. Estella leaned in, adjusted Alberto's scarf, and with a delicate gesture, moved the girl aside. "Come on, Sophia, your father must be tired," she said with a soft but firm tone. In the dining room, everything was arranged with care. A long table, freshly baked bread, California red wine, and a plate of prosciutto to open the appetite. Estella talked nonstop, telling anecdotes about shopping at the market and preparations for the upcoming Memorial Day parade. Her voice filled the space as if wanting to cover any silence. Sophia, seated at her side, looked at the plate without tasting a bite. Alberto, busy responding with monosyllables, didn't notice the sadness appearing in his daughter's eyes. Only when the girl raised her voice, soft but clear, did an unexpected silence occur. "Dad, when are you coming back again?" The question fell like a stone in water, breaking the dinner's artificial harmony. Alberto smiled, caressed his daughter's hair, and promised to return soon. He said it with tenderness, convinced that a promise was enough to dissipate the girl's loneliness. Estella, however, looked at her with coldness. In those seconds, Sophia understood that her refuge wasn't in the marble walls or elegant dresses, but only in her father's arms. Alberto smiled, caressed her hair, and promised to return soon, without noticing Estella's cold gaze fixed on the girl. When the luxury car door closed behind Mr. Alberto, Estella's smile erased like a fallen mask. The echo of the engine driving away was the signal for her true nature to emerge without restraint. Sophia, who had followed her father's silhouette from the hallway window, felt the house become larger, colder, and much more hostile. Estella turned slowly, her heels resonating on the marble. Her voice was no longer sweet, but harsh. "Come here, Sophia. Don't think that because your father spoils you, you can live here like a queen." The girl lowered her gaze and walked slowly toward the kitchen. The modern, gleaming space smelled of detergent and food recently stored in the refrigerator. There a basin full of clothes waited for her, piled without mercy. "Today you'll learn to be useful," Estella said, pushing the basin toward the small girl. Sophia tried to lift it. The weight was too much for her thin arms. The wet water soaked the edge of her gray dress, and her feet could barely maintain balance. Tears appeared, but she swallowed them with pride, remembering how her father always told her she was strong. "See? You're not even good for this," Estella snorted, crossing her arms. Sophia's heart beat fast. In silence, she bent down to pick up a fallen garment and whispered so low nobody seemed to hear, "I wish Mom were here." The kitchen, spacious and full of shiny appliances, seemed to mock her. Every corner gleamed with luxury, and yet there, with her small hands red from effort, the girl felt like an intruder in her own house. Time passed slowly. Estella came in and out giving dry orders. Clean the table, dry the dishes, fold the clothes. Sophia obeyed in silence, biting her lip. At the end of the afternoon, exhausted, she could barely stay on her feet. Her undone braids fell over her shoulders, and dark circles drew themselves under her clear eyes. When by accident she stumbled on a chair, and the basin almost tipped over, Estella let out a cold laugh. "Be careful, girl. If you break something, I'll tell your father, and you know who'll pay the consequences? You." Fear gripped Sophia's chest. She knelt among the wet clothes and tried to fix them with tears falling silently. She wanted to scream, but no words came out. Outside on the street could be heard the laughter of children playing ball, reminding her of a world that seemed distant. The girl remained on her knees on the floor, tears in her eyes, while Estella closed the door with a slam. The sound of a pitcher falling mixed with the distant laughter of neighbors enjoying themselves on a cafe terrace. All of Boston seemed to be preparing for Memorial Day. Colorful banners hung between balconies, stores displayed typical treats, and families filled the streets with animated conversations. However, in the Mendoza mansion reigned a different silence, a heavy silence that not even the marble walls managed to soften. Sophia was in the kitchen, her thin arms trying to fold an endless pile of clothes. The gray dress she wore was damp at the bottom, a reminder of the morning's tasks. She glanced sideways at the window, listening to the bustle of children playing ball in the nearby park. The contrast hurt her. Outside, everything was life and celebration. Inside her house, everything was cold order and demands. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carmen walked back from the market. Her step was unhurried, with that calm of someone who no longer rushes for anything. She carried a cloth bag full of oranges, freshly baked bread, and a small bouquet of wildflowers she had bought at an improvised stand. She had known the Mendoza family for years, but had always found it a strange home, too silent for a house with a small girl. As she passed in front of the gate, she heard a metallic noise, like a basin falling to the floor, and stopped. She rang the bell gently. The door opened slowly, revealing Sophia, who could barely hold a basin full of wet clothes. Her small arms trembled, and drops slid down the edge, falling on the entrance hall's shiny floor. The girl looked up. Her clear eyes met Carmen's. There was exhaustion in them, and also a gleam of barely contained plea. "Do you need help, dear?" Carmen asked, bending down a bit to look at her closely. Her voice was warm, with that maternal tone she used with all the neighborhood children. Sophia forced a weak smile and shook her head. "I'm fine, ma'am. Thank you very much." The older woman frowned. That phrase sounded rehearsed, like learned by memory. She observed how the girl tried to maintain balance, as if fearing to show weakness. The entrance hall's luxury couldn't hide the fragility of that small figure who seemed loaded with too great a weight. Before Carmen could insist, Estella's firm steps resonated on the marble. She appeared dressed in a red suit that stood out in the afternoon's soft light. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her perfume invaded the air like an invisible barrier. "Ah, Mrs. Carmen," she exclaimed with a wide, almost rehearsed smile. "What a surprise to see you here. Do you need something?" "They delivered a letter by mistake that was addressed to you," Carmen responded, carefully taking out a folded envelope from her cloth bag. Estella took it quickly, as if fearing the neighbor would stay too long at the door. "Thank you so much. How thoughtful of you," she said curtly, but with a dry tone. Then she turned to the girl. "Sophia, go back to your chores." The little girl lowered her head and obeyed without protesting. The basin hit her knees as she advanced through the hallway, gradually disappearing into the shadows. Carmen followed her with her gaze, feeling a lump in her throat. "The girl looks a bit tired," the neighbor commented, trying to sound casual. "Oh, she's very sensitive," Estella responded with a brief laugh, adjusting the necklace on her neck. "She likes to exaggerate, but she lacks nothing here. I assure you." Carmen nodded, though inside something didn't fit. She delivered a couple of courteous words and said goodbye. As she walked down the sidewalk with the bag of oranges gently hitting her leg, the weight of the scene remained in her heart. Upon reaching the corner, she couldn't help but turn around. There, in the upper floor window, she distinguished Sophia pressed against the glass. The girl observed outside like a little bird trapped in a gilded cage, with her hands resting on the glass in an expression that mixed sadness and hope. That gleam in her eyes was like a silent scream that Carmen couldn't ignore. Carmen walks away down the sidewalk, but looks back and sees Sophia pressed against the window like a little bird trapped in her gilded cage. The door slam resonated in the kitchen, and in that silence, Sophia hugged the basin as if it were a shield. She felt that recipient full of damp clothes and too heavy for her thin arms was the wall behind which she could hide from her stepmother's gaze. The mansion, with its wide marble hallways and lamps turned on too early, suddenly seemed a brilliant cage that imprisoned the girl's every movement. Mrs. Estella appeared in the kitchen threshold with the security of someone who dominates their territory. Her red dress stood out like a flame against the white tiles. She wore her hair loose, perfectly waved, and a pearl necklace that tinkled to the rhythm of her steps. In her eyes was impatience, and on her lips a crooked smile that had nothing of affection. "This won't do, Sophia. Wash it all again. It's dirty," she ordered, pointing at the clothes with an annoyed gesture. Sophia swallowed. The afternoon heat entered through the window, tinting the floor with golden reflections, but she only felt cold. She made an effort to obey. She hugged the basin, inclined her small body to one side to lift it. The weight was unbearable. She took a couple of staggering steps, and a damp sleeve slipped, dripping water on the floor. Each drop seemed to amplify the failure Estella expected to point out. "More careful," she exclaimed, crossing her arms. "You can't even do that." The girl pressed her lips together, trying to repress a sob. In her eyes formed tears she blinked forcefully to contain. "If I cry, it'll be worse," she thought, repeating to herself silently like a spell. She remembered the few times her father had encouraged her. "You're strong, Sophia. Always strong." But now those words seemed distant, as if coming from a different world. With a final effort, she tried to rest the basin on the marble table. Her arms trembled, the edge slipped, and the dirty water spilled violently on the floor. The blow of wet garments against the pavement resonated like thunder in the room. Sophia fell to her knees immediately, picking up the soaked shirts with small hands that could barely hold them. The smell of detergent mixed with dampness permeated the air. Her gray dress, now stained, stuck to her body. Tears finally rolled down her cheeks, falling on the wet clothes. Estella remained motionless, observing with an expression mixing contempt and boredom. "You're not even good for this," she said, each word charged with venom. Sophia lowered her head even more. The silence was so profound the slow dripping of garments on the puddle could be heard. Her arms hurt, her back, her entire soul. She closed her eyes for an instant and imagined her mother's voice. A warm voice that told her everything would be all right, but upon opening them she only found the cold marble floor and her stepmother's erect figure. The living room clock marked 7 in the evening with a muffled chime. Outside, the city continued vibrating. The drums of the Memorial Day parade rumbled in the distance, accompanied by cheerful voices singing. The contrast with the kitchen impregnated with sadness was overwhelming. Estella took a couple of steps forward, the sound of her heels bouncing on the walls. She leaned barely to let her words fall like a direct blow. "Pick this up and do it right. And don't you dare cry, understand?" The girl nodded with a quick gesture, not daring to speak. Her tears fell anyway, disobeying the order, but she did it in silence, in a desperate attempt not to make things worse. With clumsy movements, she put the garments back in the basin. The effort was useless. Each piece seemed to weigh twice as much as before, Suddenly, a new sound burst into the tension, the creak of the front door. A different, fresher air filtered through the hallway, bringing with it the echo of firm steps approaching. Estella straightened immediately, tensing her shoulders. Sophia looked up, surprised, with eyes still moist. In that instant, the creak of the front door is heard. Someone has just entered the house. The steps resonated in the hallway like unexpected thunder. Sophia, on her knees on the floor with her hands buried in the damp clothes, raised her head suddenly. Her eyes, swollen from crying, shone with a gleam of hope and fear. Mrs. Estella, who seconds before dominated the kitchen with her impeccable red dress and haughty gesture, remained rigid like a statue. The swinging door opened forcefully, and in the threshold appeared Mr. Alberto, still with briefcase in hand and coat on his shoulder, surprised to find his family in such a disconcerting scene. The house's air changed. The echo of the city celebrating Memorial Day came through open windows, bells, laughter, the sound of a marching band downtown. Inside, on the other hand, the tension was so dense one could barely breathe. Alberto frowned, incapable of believing what he saw. His daughter kneeling, with the gray dress soaked, picking up dirty clothes as if she were a maid. "What does this mean?" His voice thundered deep, breaking the kitchen silence. Estella reacted quickly, improvising a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Alberto, darling, it's not what it seems. Sophia had an accident. She was playing with the water, and—" "I wasn't playing," the girl interrupted with a trembling thread of voice, but charged with truth. The silence fell like a lead weight. Alberto left the briefcase on the table with a sharp blow that made the silverware vibrate. He bent toward his daughter, and upon touching her small shoulders, felt the cold of wet clothes, and her body's trembling. His heart gave a leap. Sophia looked at him with reddened eyes and murmured almost breathlessly, "Dad, I just wanted to do it right." Those words were a dagger. Alberto hugged her tightly, as if wanting to repair in seconds all the lost time. The girl clung to his neck, sobbing against his chest, and in that instant he understood the magnitude of his error. He had been so busy building an empire, traveling, signing contracts, that he had forgotten the essential, protecting and accompanying his daughter. He raised his gaze toward Estella. "Since when does my daughter do tasks that don't correspond to her? Since when does she kneel like a servant in her own house?" Estella stepped back, wobbling a bit on her heels. "You're exaggerating, Alberto. I just wanted to teach her discipline. A girl needs to learn to what?" he roared, interrupting her. "To humiliate herself? To live in fear under the same roof that should give her security?" Alberto's voice filled the kitchen, as powerful as the bells ringing outside. Sophia held him tighter, as if those words were a wall that finally protected her for the first time in a long while. Alberto felt a whirlwind of emotions that disarmed him: guilt, rage, tenderness, and above all the certainty he had failed. "I've been an absent father," he thought, "and in my absence she has suffered." Suddenly, a soft knock on the back door interrupted the confrontation. Mrs. Carmen appeared timidly with the flower bouquet still in hand, and an expression between surprised and sorry. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I heard shouting," she said with a quiet voice. Alberto turned toward her, still hugging his daughter. Carmen looked at him fixedly with the sincerity of someone who has nothing to lose. "I've been observing for a while," she added. "That girl needs affection, not chains." The neighbor's words fell like a hammer blow on Estella. Her facade of elegant and controlled woman cracked. She tried to speak, but from her lips only came an incomprehensible murmur. Alberto, on the other hand, stood erect. He lifted Sophia in his arms, noticing how light she was, as if all her weight had transformed into fragility. His eyes swept the kitchen, the puddle of water, the wet clothes, Estella's pale face. And then, with a firm and trembling voice at once, he pronounced an oath that would change everything. From today on, Sophia will never again feel alone in this house. The ringing of the cathedral bells filled the room as if the entire city were witness. Outside, balconies displayed embroidered banners, and people applauded as the parades passed. Inside, a father had just awakened to the truth. Estella clung to the doorframe, incapable of responding, while Alberto held Sophia tightly, and the entire kitchen seemed to tremble under the weight of the revealed truth. Night had fallen over Boston, and the bustle of the Memorial Day parades filled the streets with drums, songs, and the smell of barbecue. Balconies displayed silk banners and lit candles, while families shared typical treats and children ran with paper lanterns. Inside the Mendoza mansion, on the other hand, there was no luxury or music, but a dense silence interrupted only by Sofia's broken sobs, still clinging to her father's neck. Alberto held her firmly, walking with slow steps down the hallway toward the living room. Each elegant painting, each expensive piece of furniture he encountered along the way, suddenly seemed useless to him, almost ridiculous. What good were those symbols of success if his daughter had suffered humiliation in the very house he built? He felt each object was a mute witness to his absence. He sat with Sofia on the wide sofa and covered her with a light blanket. The girl, exhausted, hid her face in his chest and breathed deeply, as if finally finding a refuge. Her small hands clung to her father's suit lapel with unexpected strength, as if fearing that if she let go, she would lose him again. Mrs. Carmen, who had entered behind them, left the flower bouquet on the table. Her gesture was simple, but filled the room with a special warmth. She approached cautiously and said with a calm voice, "What's important now is that she knows she's not alone. Children remember gestures of love more than any words." Alberto looked at her, and in his eyes reflected a profound gratitude. His throat was dry, but he managed to respond. "You're right, Mrs. Carmen. I've been blind. I've been so busy with my work that I didn't see what was happening in my own house." Estella remained at the door, her rigid silhouette outlined by the living room's warm light. She had lost all the security that characterized her. Her red dress no longer seemed a symbol of power, but a broken mask. She tried to speak, but the words drowned in her throat. The weight of Alberto's gaze kept her silent. Sofia raised her face with still moist cheeks. Her clear eyes sought her father's. "Are you going to stay, Dad?" she asked with a whisper that contained all the hope in the world. Alberto caressed her hair, kissed her forehead, and responded firmly, "Yes, Sofia, I'm staying, and I won't let anything or anyone hurt you again." The girl closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while smiled. The gesture was small, but for Alberto it meant more than any business achievement. In that instant he understood that his true wealth was there, in that embrace, in the possibility of rebuilding what he had broken with his absence. Mrs. Carmen said goodbye discreetly, leaving behind an air of serenity. Upon closing the door, the silence that remained wasn't of solitude, but of calm. Outside, the bells rang celebrating the holiday, and inside, a father and daughter began a new life together. That night they dined on toasted bread with olive oil and cheddar cheese, the first thing Alberto found in the kitchen. There was no elegant dinnerware or crystal glasses, but each bite was full of love. Sofia, seated next to her father, looked at him with bright eyes, convinced that moment was a gift. While the girl fell asleep on the sofa, wrapped in the blanket and hugging her father's arm, Alberto looked out the window. The parade passed with lit torches, and he thought that light was a perfect symbol. Even in darkness, there's always a flame capable of restoring hope. The house no longer seemed cold or empty. For the first time in a long while, it had become a true home. The image of that father with his daughter asleep in his arms, while outside the Memorial Day bells resonated in Boston, remains engraved as an echo that doesn't only belong to that family, but also to all of us. It wasn't a scene of luxury or splendor. The table was set with toasted bread, a bit of cheddar cheese and olive oil, simple dishes that, however, carried with them the warmth of the authentic. That night, there were no crystal dinnerware or elegant toasts, but there was something infinitely more valuable: the certainty that love had found its place in a home that seemed lost. Dear listeners, if this story has moved you, leave a 1 in the comments. If you believe we can still improve, mark a 0 and tell us what you would add, because your voices help us grow together. The lesson that springs from this story is clear and universal. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or titles hanging in an office, but in the capacity to love, to ask for forgiveness, and to repair what was broken. A gesture of tenderness can change a destiny more than any fortune. Everyone, regardless of age or condition, deserves a place where they feel protected, heard, and loved. Money builds houses, but only compassion converts those houses into homes. And like that lamp lit in a window during the parade, a simple light, an almost anonymous act of kindness is enough to guide us through life's darkest nights. Who among us doesn't remember some hug, some word of encouragement that arrived just when we needed it most? Those memories, not material achievements, are what sustain us when we grow old. Perhaps upon hearing this story, many think of their own children, their grandchildren, or even the lost opportunities to extend a hand. It's never too late to take a step toward reunion. Sometimes it's enough to invite to dinner, to write a letter, to say an "I love you" that seemed forgotten. Like the father in this story, we can always choose to stop looking toward our external obligations and turn our gaze toward the most intimate, family, that refuge that gives meaning to our days. Therefore, in closing these words, the invitation to reflect remains. Take an instant to think about whom you could embrace today, whom you could call to repair a silence. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs it, because in the end, what remains aren't the accumulated riches or the world's applause, but the memory of the invisible bonds that sustain us. And like a lantern that softly illuminates an old Boston street's shadows, true love will always be the flame that guides us back home.